Turn zero is a phrase that's becoming increasingly popular in reference to Yu-Gi-Oh! Turn zero and phrases like it are becoming a detriment to the community as a whole due to the narrow nature of the name and the generalizations associated with them, and many people lack the extensive thinking to think about what's being said, simply due to the fact that that's not the kind of way they engage with the game. I will be covering this topic in 4 points: the presence of Turn Zero in Yu-Gi-Oh! And if it exists, the existence of Turn Zero in other card games such as Magic the Gathering, what the pre-game actions in Yu-Gi-Oh! Really are, and then a small discussion on reductive takes, which is my main point at the end, as well as a conclusion. I will be starting with Turn Zero in Yu-Gi-Oh! Turn Zero in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just doesn't exist. Turn Zero as a definition is an action that can be taken before you've had your first turn. Examples are things like Tearlaman's Havness and Vanquish So Holisu. And that's the issue. There is a major flaw here, and as to how the player as a whole views this concept, that these aren't Turn Zero actions. They fit the player definition because it's before your first turn, so it's technically your Turn Zero. But the name implies that it's an effect that can be taken before a normal action can occur, and especially in the cases of things like Holisu, that's just not true. Holisu specifically requires it to be the main phase. These are inherently powerful effects, and they can allow decks to play on axes that many decks can't and will be foreign to certain players, and things like Tearlaman allowed that to be not only priced out the format by some things, but also thoroughly scaled out the format because they're not used to it, and decided to play other decks instead. So if these aren't Turn Zero cards, what are? A real Turn Zero card is very rare due to being something basically unrespondable, because it's before the game has occurred, and therefore they're not particularly interesting for most card games. The best example for active Turn Zero cards would, especially in my case, having a small amount of experience with it, would be the Ley Lines for Magic the Gathering. Cards that can, before the game begins, if you have it in your hand, you can just place onto the battlefield. They are declared in sequential order, but they are resolved simultaneously, so it's still before any regular game action can occur, and player priority makes no difference in resolution for it. This is in stark contrast to Yu-Gi-Oh's Turn Zero effects, where either a condition has to be met, such as being in a phase like Holisu's main phase, or something else such as K9 Azuna's, where you have to activate an effect in hand or graveyard. This leads me to believe they should be given a different name or something else similar to them, so we can differentiate the nature of these effects. Another example of a Turn Zero action would be something like Iron Thorns and the active abilities of Pokemon. An example of this would be the 2024 World's Winning deck of Iron Thorns, where if you found the card in your opening hand and placed it in your active slot, neither player will be able to activate a certain type of card before anything has happened, due to the fact that the card would flip up and its effect would be applying continuously. So, what are Turn Zero actions in Yu-Gi-Oh? There's both a simple and complex answer to this question. The simple answer is there isn't one. There are no cards that can be used before the game begins, and thus fit the same style as Turn Zero cards in other games. The more complex answer is moving to things outside the physical game, and it can be split into 3 pre-game actions rather than effects. The first is deck building. Now I can hear you saying already, that's not Yu-Gi-Oh specific, and yeah, I know, that's not what I said. It's just, it is present in Yu-Gi-Oh! And due to have no other examples, it's one of the things we actually have. I would go into depth about it, but it's not my forte, and it is a completely different discussion video. The choices you make in deck building in some formats are far and away more important than your actual gameplay, especially in formats with very few decks. As to writing this section of the script, Justice Hunter's just come out, so maybe if you're worried about something like Paradise Smasher, he's probably getting banned. Editor me here, very, very did get banned. Good riddance, no one wanted it. Is going to be a big issue for you. You may favor single target negation hand traps instead of, say, board breakers, with the assumption that if you let your opponent get to Paradise, you're going to be losing a majority of your games. The second is the least involved for players, being the dice roll. It's an action taken before the game occurs that can very much determine it. It's not particularly interactive though, so that's all I can say about it. Third one, side decking, which is, again, another entire discussion separate from this video. But your play patterns and how you choose to side cards in and out is something that you can do before the game begins to help and change your outcome. Now we've talked over the actual Turn Zero actions Yu-Gi-Oh! We can delve into why the current understanding of the word is reductive and unhelpful. Labeling these effects as turn zero leads to connotations with other games where pre-game actions do exist, and perpetuates the issue of bringing these new players across from other games. This can lead to misunderstanding about how these cards function, and also their applicability into the wider metagame as a whole. I'm not a veteran player, I only joined early 2022, just after the Brand Destruction deck released. When a few months later I was told that the newest deck Tearlament would be playing turn zero, I took it to mean that they would be playing on my first turn regardless of the dice roll, and there was nothing that could be done about it. This simply isn't the case. Look at decks like Labyrinth, which just set up to play Control, or Flu, whose first action could shut off the entirety of a Tearlament's player turn by just activating Shifter. I was an inexperienced player at the time, and so some of this was due to my own lack of understanding, but I wasn't expected to win any of the games by any means. That being said, this is not a one-off issue, and reducing the cards and their influence down to turn zero plays isn't going to be helpful for newer players understanding the cards, or even someone who just hasn't played with similar effects before, maybe having taken a hiatus over the period where they printed cards that were able to be used on your opponent's turn. I have issues with broad generalizations when it comes to types of cards, and this is a prime example of it. Each of these cards has unique interactions and make interesting play patterns with each other and other decks around them, apart from full power tier Havnis, but that's besides the point. Those, unless you were playing tier, you didn't get to have an interaction with that really. But no card or interaction should be forced down to one line of narratives as often as it is in Yu-Gi-Oh! It removes the nuance from the situation, like not every Charmy should be ashed and not every Droll should be called by, for example, if you're playing against them. If you continue to do this, it can prevent critical thinking about the game, and strategies can lead to very boring, repetitive games where it's almost entirely predetermined if you just follow like a flowchart instead of having nuance around the cards. If we're encouraging people to think critically about how their cards interact and based on the situation rather than just something predetermined, it can help each game feel unique and interactive, hopefully grow communities more critical of the cards and have a better understanding of what they can do with them. Overall, cards that can be used before your first turn are incredibly powerful and should be respected, however they aren't turn zero. Because of this, it should highlight how we should watch out around our language for the cards and encourage to develop a space where we don't alienate players from other games where that kind of language is used correctly. And we can learn from them to develop the limited set skills around our very small pre-game actions.